It's a pleasure to have you here. Congrats on the recent news. We've been absolutely pumped to have this conversation, and I'm sure you've been inundated with a lot of messages, with a lot of emails, with a lot of podcast requests. But thanks for taking the time to join us. I guess straight off the back, who are you? What is Magentic? And how is everything right now?
Yes, my name's Odhran, and let me know if you can hear me okay if there are any issues. I'm the CTO of Magentic, and we build agentic AI for procurement and supply chains. But I've had quite a few hats before that. I worked for a bit with OpenAI, also a bit with NASA on the Gene Lab side, did a PhD in machine learning at Oxford, focused on recent Horrocks companies as well, so really have been around the block building AI for quite a while. And my work is always focused on how you make AI systems safe by design, and how you make sure they can never make mistakes in high-profile environments. And that, we apply the same principles to procurement and supply chains. We build AI teammates that work hand in hand with supply chain professionals in order to support them in their work operations. And we specifically focus on value that is otherwise lost.
Amazing. And can we ask why supply chain, why procurement?
I mean, quite simply because it is functionally the most important process in existence. Everything we use has been manufactured in the grand scheme of things. I mean, exception of maybe fruit. But every single thing we go through, we are making things. And the process of that involves order buying other things. You know, for most large manufacturers, about 40% of their entire spend base is on materials that they use to go into their products. You scale that up to the global economy and you're looking at genuine trillions of dollars. This process goes wrong so very often. When you're dealing with such large volumes of money and so many different orders and so many different processes, things can fall through the cracks. You might have things at the wrong price. You might have things arriving late. You might have things arriving from sanctioned countries because a supplier brought it from that supplier who brought it from that supplier, and the chain goes down and you don't know where it's coming from. And these problems are so big that humans really struggle to deal with all of the different nuances and the scale of the problems and the data that sits across disparate systems. And that's why AI really provides value, because that's stuff that AI is really good at.
Wow, that's fine. We were looking into your background previously before the place that you've been working before this, OpenAI, Francis Crick Institute, Baylor Labs, NASA's FDL, and obviously the Oxford AI Society, where you got your PhD in machine learning, and also had a BA in medical sciences. And so earlier in your career, you were writing biological protocols with underneath Sam Rodriguez. In one of his teams, you were leading a small team in Sam Rodriguez's larger team, if I'm not mistaken. Quite the shift from writing biological protocols to taking on global supply chain inefficiencies head on. How's that transition happened? And what's the story of Magentic Labs?
Well, it's more linear than you'd think. So while I started in medical sciences, I was always working on a computational edge. I built teaching software for the university at various points throughout my medical degree. But the thing that really ties it together is the idea of building systems that should guaranteed to be robust in informationally confusing environments. If I am building a system which is good enough to safely run AI experiments or AI-driven experiments on lab robotics, the sort of standards you have to build, the safety you have to build, and the frameworks you have to build to allow it to operate effectively and in a way that gets useful results, well, that is a technique which can be applied to many other different domains that have well-structured information. And the nice thing about procurement as a space is it has a lot of those properties. In order to successfully allow a ship to go from Singapore to the United States and for that order to go all the way around the world, you have very specific codes, you have very specific forms, you have a standardized way of dealing with the world. And when you have that system, it means that you have a similar idea, like here is a structured model of the world, let's go create value from that. And that really translates between different domains that have those properties. I can't take full credit for the transition, though. A lot of that really comes from my co-founder, Robin, who was a senior leader at McKinsey in procurement and supply chains. We've known each other for years, and he's, of course, I guess where Robin really represents a lot of the problem domain, I really represent the solution domain.
Yeah. Yeah, and when we were looking at your profiles, we were thinking this is such a, what do they call it, founder market fit, with your technical background, your technical expertise in machine learning and your experience working at these top organizations and your co-founder's experience working in procurement at McKinsey for 5 years. We wanted to talk that you came out of stealth yesterday with your $5.5 million round led by Sequoia. What's the last 24 hours been like?
I mean, pretty busy as you could imagine. staying in stuff, I think, is an important thing because it's a step around like, how you want to build. And I think that there's a certain point where like you want to just be heads down and like not have too many eyes so you can just focus on building. But obviously, as part of any process, it's important to really show who we are. I think that's very important. Enterprise clients understanding like a clear value pitch. It's important to candidates who want to get a better picture coming into any organization. And so for us, it made sense. This was the real time to, I think, particularly now that we'd had these really wonderful, successful stories with some very, very large clients where we want to get out there and say, hey, this is us. Come speak to us. And it's been great. Like already we've got some inbound with some really, really big names. And that's happened in less than 24 hours. So exciting for us as well.
Amazing. Can you talk us through some of those success stories that you've had with some clients, just high level?
Yes, of course. Like I think the really interesting thing is we've seen multiple different Fortune 500 companies, both with revenues above 40 billion. We've seen that they had like meaningful savings we can deliver. So on certain spend buckets, we're delivering like 4% identification of their savings. So these would be spend buckets as large as $1.5 billion. And us saying, hey, in that bucket, like 4% of the value is being hemorrhaged. And we have the AI tools, A, to spot that value being lost, and B, the tools to go and recover that value automatically. And that as an end-to-end offering is really quite powerful because it's saying, hey, we can save you hundreds of millions without having to put too much thought into it.
Yeah, wow, that's insane. I mean, again, you must have been like, I know you can't talk too much to this, but I guess like coming out of stealth is also like a great GTM play, as you say. Like you're now getting more inbounds. Like, what was the actual reason for coming out of stealth? Was it we've been heads down for X amount of months already? We want the world to know who we are. We want us to maybe explore commercial conversations on a broader scale. Like how and also how long have you been in stealth?
We've been in stealth for around a year now.
Wow.
Yeah. And yeah, the main reason, multiple reasons for it. I think, I think it's important, like for any entity that, I'll say this more as broadly as like a founder, that any entity where we work with clients, like it's important to have that presence and have that space to say like, hey, we are this entity, we have this, history of what we've built, come and speak to us. I think that was an important step for us. We wanted to transition to that. Because I think stealth, as I said, really has this advantage of just being able to not have to have 600 VCs call you a day. Particularly as you imagine the profiles Robin and I have, we get a lot of inbound. And I think it's one of those things where staying focused is really important to us. But there also becomes a balance where it's valuable to clients, it's valuable to recruitment, and we care about that a lot as well. And knowing the exact point on that trade-off is where you go, well, now it makes sense to come out of stuff. That makes sense too.
And can we talk about raising from Sequoia? Sequoia's the leading VC in the world, an amazing reputation and a phenomenal track record. It's the firm everybody wants on their cap table. How was it raising from them, and how did you kind of convince them to get on board?
This is a really good question. Sequoia doesn't do that many seed investments. We are out of distribution even on Sequoia's books. Now, the best way to understand Sequoia is they really think about like three things, and in this order specifically. Who are the people? Why now? And what is the idea? Which I think is a really interesting way of framing that, where they go, okay, we see a really, really brilliant team of people who can do something that is quite transformative, and we believe this is the profile that will do it. And the second bit is the why now, which I think is a really interesting bit, which is there has been some sort of like shift in the way in which the world is being organized, which means that something new is possible. And from there's this sort of, well, let's actually like exactly what it is may not be the single most important component. It may be the general theme of what it is. Certainly for us, when we first raised our own Sequoia in the first month, we had a thesis, and we very quickly iterated on the thesis. We went, okay, well, this is the thesis we raised money on with Sequoia. In this first month, there was already something which we want to test in that thesis, and we dug down to a subset of that, and that's where we found the vast majority of value was. And so already from that initial month to that narrowing, and that narrowing has then become our real value driver for these clients. And so that's the thing which I think is interesting for Sequoia, is they're so people focused, particularly at these early stages.
Wow, that's so cool to get like an inside look at that. As you say, we were the first person that we've had on who's raised money from Sequoia. And another thing that I wanted to discuss with you, when I was reading, I think it was Julian Beck on their reasons for backing you. He's a partner at Sequoia. one of the quotes that I found really interesting was, just starting from the beginning of it, Magentic is deploying new AI teammates to prepare and defend against supplier tariff claims, find more opportunities for saving, and operate end-to-end, always with the human in the loop. This surprised me because a lot of the conversations we're having at the moment within the agentic space for any sort of B2B company, even B2C company, is that the ultimate goal is to try and keep humans out the loop as an end goal, right? No one's really getting to that 99% sort of satisfaction rate where you can be 100% sure that the result is okay enough for me to step away and just pass on the whole workflow. But it's the first time that I've seen, I've actually seen it in writing that, we understand where things are today, kind of, and we want to make sure that someone's checking this. Could you talk about why that's in there?
Yeah, I think it really resonates with what people see as valuable to them. When we actually, work on the ground with procurement professionals, they really want to see their tools as force multipliers. It's really important for them to build up an overall picture of how they're engaging with clients, what those human relationships are like, and like how you actually go forward from there. Like a lot of dynamics in procurement and supply chain are people knowing each other and having that interpersonal relationship. And so building tools that are really agents over that are critical. The whole point is to minimize the amount of time on that interaction that you might spend where a robot helps. A robot will find out every single point of information that's relevant and even draft emails. And all they're really saying is, hey, do you want me to send this email? So these interactions are very small, but a human is always kept aware of what's happening at the stages. And that's incredibly important to them in maintaining that human connection with all of their professionals and allowing them to think more strategically by being able to see what's happening across the entire chain. And that is the thing which we found as being particularly important. On top of that, it's important for always guaranteeing that a model is behaving in the right way. Because the assumption that people make is that models will just magically do the right thing. But there's always this issue of context. Our model may have all the context in the world, but it can only see what it sees in front of it. So you had a phone call with a client and they've told you something and that's not logged in anywhere. Well, the model may not know about that phone call. And if that's not in the loop, that could be something which could prevent that from generating value. And so we always care about making sure that these systems are built in such a way that they have this guarantee of visibility and safety from the lens of information that might otherwise be there.
That's fascinating. I just on that as well, there was a moment in the article that also mentioned this sort of rollout plan, and that the quote was off the shelf. Like, how is this technology being deployed? Is it something that's, is it just like in the cloud? Is it like do you sign up to your website? Are you guys going into these large manufacturing companies and building something on-prem? Like, what does that deployment strategy look like, and why he's choosing that path?
So I'll talk on high level here, so that it's bad policy to reveal security architecture in a public forum. But we deploy in lots of different ways, and we deploy in ways which are specifically designed to be as fast as possible for clients. And there's quite cool things we do there. But the thing that's most interesting, I think, on that sort of definition of deployment is the idea of like us building a core framework. So we have this framework that we built for these agents, which is incredibly scalable. And it means that we have very set deployments already. So like things like value recovery on net payment terms, or like delivery identifications. These are like processes which can be deployed in a matter of days. And there are other things which allow this framework that if someone says, hey, we've got this new value driver that we want to deploy, can you do it? We can say, yeah, let's have a look at this. And typically we can spin this up in less than a week and already start driving value in that new process. And so those are really, I think, the more interesting bits of the one, which is having a framework which we really effectively scale into new domains. And once we scale into one domain, we can broaden that out to all of our other clients.
Amazing, very cool. I also wanted to talk about some of the roles that you're hiring for. So I saw that you're hiring for like an AI engineer, data engineer, platform engineer. What's the type of person that you're looking for? What kind of characteristics or traits or cultural aspects are you looking for as you start to build out your team?
I think the most important thing is a real strong desire to learn. Where we are right now on the world of AI is that the field can radically change every 2 months. And someone has to wake up every morning and go, there are new tools. I'm willing to invest the time to properly try this and see if it works, while balancing my needs to generate the product and keep it going forward. That is the real driving force. And certainly like a lot of the best engineers we've had on our team are not people who came from an AI background beforehand. These are people who are phenomenal engineers, but were really deeply driven to learn. And that was the key motivations for joining Magentic. And for me, that's always exciting. And one of my roles as CTO is really helping people learn and develop those skills, but that is the real key thing, that drive to be part of the changing future.
Amazing. And I think the roles are all London based at the moment. Are you building an in-person team sort of like limited to London, or are you looking further afield in the US or Europe? Tell me a bit about that.
So we have an office in New York as well, and we are balancing some of the hiring needs there, but right now our core engineering team is really based in London. We're going to make a decision fairly shortly around when we're going to start hiring in the New York office, but the London core engineering team has been very effective for us so far right now, particularly as we see that like a lot of the big industrial clients we care about are very, very global. We will have clients which have manufacturing centers all over the world, and in some ways being on the central line of the GMT is very useful for being able to engage with these clients across different time zones.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've spoken to a lot of technical AI companies that are hiring their technical team in Europe and are hiring their GTM team in the US. Is that sort of how you're imagining this split, or do you think it's going to be slightly more blended than that?
It will be more blended. I think a lot of teams that you're kind of talking about, teams that may be selling into software companies. And so, of course, they're probably based in the US. A huge amount of the software buyers are US entities. But if you think about like manufacturing as a process, manufacturing is intrinsically global. And because of that, you have a much more spread about client base.
I mean, that's a fascinating space to build. And there was something I wanted to chime in. We were looking at who was on your cap table before we jumped on the show. And McKinsey are on your cap table as well. And maybe you could sort of advise me if I'm thinking about this wrong, but if I've understood it correctly, would it be fair to say that traditionally the problem that you're solving for some of these large-scale manufacturers, maybe a McKinsey would be brought in or a BCG would be brought in and say, hey, look, we have this problem. We don't know where it is. Can you find it and solve it? Like, how does that, with them on your cap table, I just find that interesting, if I am right, if that is a traditionally sort of McKinsey plugged gap, that they're on your cap table. Can you maybe talk a bit about this? Because I know that your co-founder worked at McKinsey for a number of years, specifically on procurement and supply chains.
Yeah, and I think the work that McKinsey does has been very useful for a lot of companies. But I think there's a real step change in what we aim to do. When you bring in consultants for a project, by the very nature of the product, that project is time limited. And it's also not necessarily around value recovery. So a consultant might come and say, hey, you've got these things where you've got this process that's maybe not working and this delivery is happening here. And they'll look at maybe back over like a year, they'll give you like a data sample and say, okay, cool. This is the space of the information you have. You can now make an informed decision about that. We change that. This process, A, is happening 24/7, B is continuous, and C is actually focused on value recovery. It's one thing to get a presentation which says, hey, this process is going wrong. And it's another thing to say, hey, we have had the robots go and send all these emails, take the phone calls, and update these things in SAP to get you every single dollar of that back. And that is the flow that changes that.
Wow. Amazing. And it's just a vote of confidence, right? If you've got McKinsey who are both backing you both as they have some personal connection, but also because they understand and they know the problem as well as anyone, I imagine. An amazing backer to have, I bet.
100%. I mean, it's something that I mentioned your co-founder. Then something on the show that we often like to talk about is how you met your co-founder. How did you? I mean, we said it earlier, right? That the founder market fit. I remember when I was sort of researching, I looked at Robin's profile, and I saw McKinsey at first, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. He's at McKinsey, and then in brackets it was like procurement and supply chain. It was like specifically focused, which just made me laugh because I don't think we've had anyone on that has a more like fine-tuned sort of like a background for this particular problem in this particular market. How did you guys meet, and what's the story there?
You're not going to believe this. We met at a hackathon back in the day. Yeah, no, we have the fun accolade of like every hackathon we've done together, we've won. So we kind of trusted we could work.
Easy.
But, we like Robin and I really met as people working together in incredibly focused environments, and it was real proof that we knew we were going to work together well. And I think that for us set up a dynamic where we would always engage in the collaborative projects together, and we became friends through our work, which I think is often a bit of an inversion relative to a lot of the ways people meet to form companies. And, since then we've always stayed in contact around like, hey, if we ever believe and have really high conviction on an industry, an idea and a skill set, we will launch something. And Magentic was the real accumulation of that. 7 years in the making.
It's amazing that you won every single hackathon.
Yeah, sorry, we can't let you brush over that.
If we weren't on the same team, we usually came second. I like that.
That's so funny. You have to somehow just share the podium. And in terms of like, split. I know that your CTO, Robin's background, you're mentioning hackathons, but it was my understanding that Robin's background was more commercial focused. What does the dynamic look like internally right now? What are you sort of dividing the org from a commercial to a technical split? How does that look?
Yeah, so I very much sit on the technical side and Robin sits on the commercial side. We have, I think a mistake that a lot of early stage companies make is they get, obsessed with the technology and they get really excited by building something and building something which is self-contained. And that can be a rewarding signal in itself. Ultimately, we are always focused on building something which drives value for people. And, commercial engagement is hugely part of that. And so I think it helps that we have quite clear, obviously we're in the office together every day, so we're always seeing each other's work and be able to comment on it. But by having this sort of separations of intent, it means that we are able to really focus on driving value in these domains.
Wow, really, really cool. I mean, we've been, it's something that we've discussed a lot is that early stage, founder, partner fit, right? And it's something that is so hard to get right. Something that I was following quite a lot, which is a company, I guess, an example that didn't really manage to get it as right is the H company, Holistic. If you came across them, they did a £220 million seed round a while back now. I think it was maybe 2 years ago or a year ago, based in France. There was 5 co-founders and they'd raised an insane sum of money, 220 mils, a pre-seed. And as soon as they got the money, co-founder after co-founder after co-founder would start to drop off, right? Because the mission and the sort of the reasons for stepping in and taking the money and following through, when you raise that much money, I think maybe the lines start to blur, right? I think it was quoted as operational differences. You and your co-founder seem to have a much more sort of focused, this is what we're doing, we know how to get there, right? You mentioned right at the start of the interview that originally you had a larger plan, but you sort of found that almost 80 or 90% of the value of the plan was in a smaller part of what you were looking at when you guys were in stealth. What is that the vision for you guys looking to the future? What does it look like?
Yeah, good question. I think there's multiple things to say on that. I think Holistic AI is an interesting one. I think there are some extra caveats with, I believe they sold secondaries as part of that as well in their seed round. So there was, yeah.
That's crazy. I did not know.
If you have 5 founders who've just been given a few million and they had the tiniest disagreement, then they might walk away with a few million, not to worry too much about it. So it was a bit.
But even on that, is that that's what I guess it's a competitive round and we can give you money if you go with us, right? That's what the call for them is.
I don't know. It's a strange piece. I can't comment too much on it. But yeah,
vision looking forward, you and your co-founder, what's the future set like for Magentic?
As I said, we really focus on this narrow value statement because this is where we drive value the fastest for large manufacturers. If we're coming into a company, we really have to show that we can be generating, millions in savings in the case of a few weeks. And, I think it's really important for us. It was we could do all of these different things to improve procurement and supply chain processes, but let's really enter with stuff which is the fastest thing to drive value and drives instant recovery. And that was the narrowing for us around saying, well, let's focus on things like deliveries, payment terms not being matched, consolidation opportunities and parts, because we know these will drive value straight away. But the roadmap is always how we continue to drive value across the entirety of a procurement life chain cycle. There are events which are really important around things like contract renegotiations. And these will typically happen, maybe just once a year. And of course, we're not going to necessarily generate value in the first week because we're waiting for that procurement contract renegotiation to start. But by its very definition, by having our agents work alongside these systems, we're building up a genuine longitudinal holistic picture of what is happening across the entirety of the organization. And this is really informative for these negotiation steps and for recommending potential consolidations or potential new suppliers. And so the roadmap forward is how we continue to help support the value of procurement processes at historically long scales. We also see ourselves moving further and further up into very, very advanced manufacturing. We're having some really interesting conversations of aerospace right now. And I think the ultimate goal is being at a point where we can work with semiconductors, which are some of the most advanced processes in the world. And they still have very complex procurement needs that go wrong a lot of the time.
Very cool. Okay, so there's a clear path to expanding the market and going even deeper, which is amazing.
And at that point, we'll have to have you back on for another segment as you hit each one of these milestones, because it just sounds absolutely fascinating. It's something that we've not seen before as well in the world where we're seeing AI tool after AI tool after AI tool get all this funding. It's really, really cool to see something a bit more
it's like a part say wish, but it's like a real niche where you found a real problem to go after, and you're perfectly attuned to solve it.
Yeah, which is really cool.
But Odhran, we're out of time. But thank you so much for joining us. We've absolutely loved having you. Keep us up to date with how things go. We'd love to have you or your co-founder back on the show to talk about how things are going, what's next, and all that good stuff.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Have a good one.